And let's talk to Isabel Oakeshott. Isabel, very good morning to you.
Good morning. I know what a depressing intervention that is by the Prime Minister. What people are crying out for is strong leadership.
Right.
And, I think people on all sides of the political divide generally appreciate strong, decisive leadership, even if they don't actually necessarily agree with all the sentiments of it. We want leaders that will stand up and basically make a position on something,
Right.
not appeal, maybe please, if I ask you very nicely, might you consider not trolling the Jewish community at this point by coming out and marching in the most offensive fashion on our streets? I just don't think his intervention is anywhere near good enough, and it will be, and already has been, completely and utterly ignored.
Yeah.
Something has gone very, very wrong with our country, and we all know this anyway. When you've got, for example, the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow urging people to come out and grab your flag, and they don't mean the British flag there,
Right.
and your keffir, those raggy things that people wear on marches. 2 years on, we want justice. Yeah, right, we do. We want justice for the people that are still living in agony, on the brink of death in those hideous Hamas tunnels. There are still hostages who are just about surviving.
Yeah.
They've not been brought home. There are Jews being slain on our own streets in Britain. And these absolute morons are coming out waving their black, white, red and green things and rubbing it in everybody's
Yeah.
faces.
I know. It's shocking. I mean, it's worse than that. In Liverpool University, they're having a Palestine bake sale, believe it or not. And they've got a picture of a cake, which is, of course, in Palestine colours. And it actually says, which I think is particularly odious, time for dessert. I mean, what do they mean by that, other than to be completely and utterly disingenuous and awful about the people who died that day?
Yeah, it's disgusting. I am beyond sick of these flags on our streets. You've got likes of Gary Neville. I nearly said Gary Lineker because it's usually him.
Yeah.
Complaining about the Union Jack being divisive. That's basically what he's saying. I haven't heard him complaining about all these pro-Palestinian marches and flags.
No.
Why does that not bother him? I think those demonstrations and the continual waving of those flags that are not British flags is very, very dividing and creates an extremely bad atmosphere in our country. That's putting it pretty mildly. I would long ago have found a way to ban these marches. I don't like banning things any more than you do, Mike. I'm a libertarian.
Yeah.
Generally, I want people to be able to do pretty much what they want to do within reason, if it doesn't harm and hurt others. But things have come to such a bad pass in our country. They really have.
Yeah.
That I think it's time for an extremely firm and decisive hand that says, this is who we are. This is Britain. We're not having foreign flags routinely waved on our streets. There are other countries that have no problem, Western countries, by the way, European countries have no problem whatsoever saying, you know what, we're not actually having people showing allegiance to another country. It's not even a country in this case, on our streets. It just doesn't work.
No, exactly right. And I mean, rather like the Refugee Convention and rather like the asylum laws that we seem to be slavishly following in this country, whatever the rules are for marching around, again, have been sort of surpassed by the way that people now behave. People behave differently. And, let's not forget, there has been a pro-Palestinian march every single bloody weekend since 2 years ago when October the 7th happened. And they even had a march on the night of October the 7th in 2023 and demonstrating outside the Israeli embassy before the Israelis had even formed any kind of counter-attack to what had happened on the day.
We've got a headline now showing on Talk that says national shame, and every day at the moment seems to be a day of national shame for the UK. I heard you and Peter Blexley earlier saying, addressing these accusations that people like us that continually criticise what's going on are talking down the country. No, we're not. We are more ambitious for this country, for our country, than it should turn into this kind of toxic, massive, angry division that it is now. our country does not have to be like this. And it is like this because there has been an obsession with so-called tolerance and an obsession with so-called diversity. And both of those two things have actually led to precisely the opposite. Yeah. Fixating on diversity has allowed a set of rules under which pretty much anyone can do anything. Anything is, a blind eye is turned to pretty much anything. And hence we are, where our society feels really, really fractured and very, very sick.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I don't know how long it's going to take to fix that, because this Labour government doesn't seem in any way, shape or form prepared to do it. You know, Starmer will make his mealy-mouthed little interventions, you know, but in the end, Gary Neville, actually, when he came out yesterday and spoke about the cause of problems in this country being all down to middle-aged white men, I mean, that's what the Labour government thinks.
Not the Gary Nevilles or the Gary Linekers of this world, or the people that live in nice houses and anyone who earns above a certain amount that can kind of insulate themselves from what's going on. What I worry about is the conversations that are happening amongst disaffected, particularly men in working class communities, in towns and areas which have been so heavily blighted by mass uncontrolled immigration. I hear really worrying things about those people. I hear about groups of men that are basically on the brink of becoming vigilante because they are so exasperated, they are so disaffected. No one wants that for our country. But if we have another 3 years of this type of rhetoric, of these pro-Palestinian marches, and do you know what, I reckon these marches may go on even if a solution is found. Because these guys, you know, they really get off on going out and waving those stupid flags in our communities. I really wonder that this doesn't end up in some pretty horrible stuff.
Oh, true. Well, Matthew Syed, I don't know if you saw his piece at the weekend in the Sunday Times. He went down to visit the protest on Saturday, and he found some really appalling views being held by what he regarded as what appeared to be relatively middle-class, ordinary white people, right? Not Palestinians at all. And he said to one of them, you know, how long does this go on for? And he said, until Palestine is a state and until Israel is destroyed. That was what their message was.
Exactly. So that's not ever going to happen because Israel's not going to be destroyed. You know, therefore, these people just want to come out and be angry. And I think this is a proxy for so much else, isn't it? You know, I don't believe that the majority of people on those marches, I don't believe that any more than about, I don't know, 5% at most are particularly informed of the issues. I think that they just want to come out and support something that they see as a left-wing cause. And as such, it's not going to actually stop. Maybe it'll move on to some other far-flung conflict that suddenly they get interested in. I mean, I'm baffled as to why these people have no interest, for example, in what's going on in Sudan.
Or Nigeria.
That's like a proper humanitarian crisis with vast scale death and destruction that actually has a very obvious impact on Europe because there's such a flow of people coming up through Africa and into the UK as refugees or, you know, economic migrants desperate to get to something better, and who can blame them? But none of these so-called hashtag be kind people on those marches don't seem to care any little fig about Sudan.
No, of course they don't. I'm going to show you something which might amuse you, this to cheer everybody up. Here's Gary Neville talking about Keir Starmer in 2022.
Get behind Keir Starmer. This is a serious politician, someone who's headed up a major department in the CPS, someone who is trustworthy and has integrity. All things that this current government don't have. Not only this current government damaging us in our country, our relationships with our partners in Europe and around the world are broken and shattered. And they've burned their bridges with our partners in Europe and around the world. And we need to rebuild our relationships, we need to rebuild our reputation. And that is not going to happen under a Conservative government.
I just wonder why anybody ever took this bloke seriously.
Well, apparently he's a really very, very genuinely very, very good sports pundit. He was a very good footballer. So maybe that, you know, when people have that kind of platform, people listen. And at that time, Keir Starmer needed any kind of razzle-dazzle that he could get. I mean, let's face it, he still does. You know, that sort of the peak of his sort of celebrity pulling power, didn't it? It's all gone a bit since then.
He really doesn't have much to say. But here's what Starmer's now got pinned to the top of his Twitter. Have a look at this.
I will fight with every breath I have. Fight for working people. Fight for the tolerant, decent, respectful Britain that I know. People say, Conference, that a nation like ours can't be a community, that it's too diverse, too divided. I reject that. That goes against everything I stand for, everything I've served, everything I understand about this great country that I love. The purpose of this government: end decline, reform our public services, grow our economy from the grassroots, and with resolve, with respect, with the flag in our hands, we will renew this country until we can say with total conviction that Britain is built for all.
Yeah, well, it isn't really, is it? Gary Neville won't be keen on those flags being flown, by the way.
Why are you subjecting us to this at this time in the morning? I'm feeling faintly nauseous.
It's awful. Well, because also the worst thing is he's trying to be like masterful, you know? You know when you find men who just aren't and they try and it doesn't work? That's him.
It does not work at all. You know, oh my, you know, and I will fight with every breath in my body for all these things that he's not even remotely begun to achieve. It's all gone backwards since he's done. You know, I kind of hope that he's going to be ousted, although, on the other hand, he's so bad that, of course, it suits opposition parties if he carries on being ever weaker and ever more useless.
Yeah.
But for the sake of the country, it'd be good if he were ousted. But unfortunately, it appears that the people in that room that are all clapping away and waving the little flags, which they must have hated doing because it's just not, maybe Palestinian flags, and might have been a bit more up for it. They actually felt that that was a barnstorming speech and that Keir Starmer has reinforced his position.
Yeah, I mean, it really is incredible. I mean, he's now not even... The thing they were clinging to until, I think, Sunday was that Keir Starmer was still the person that most British people thought should be the Prime Minister of this country. Now he's even lost that to Nigel Farage, who's now 1 point ahead of him, who was 10 points behind him only about 6 months ago.
And I wonder whether that gap will widen. I mean, there's no doubt that Nigel Farage is, to use a very overused word, divisive. But what I mean by that is that there is a section of society that just cannot imagine ever supporting Nigel Farage. They're deaf to listening to him. They simply won't. In their mind, they have an image of him that he's bad and awful and racist. That's their image, and they're not going to be moved from that. But I think that there's now a shifting middle of Britain that is very receptive to what Nigel Farage promotes and stands for, and actually has begun to realise that they totally got this guy wrong. They underestimated him, and they're putting so much hope in the party. You know, I think so many people feel that reform is the last chance for this to save the country. I know that sounds like really so sort of dramatic, but that is what people say. You know, they come up to Reform MPs and say, thank you for trying. You know, I think the last chance. That's not me saying that. I think there is a mood of that amongst a lot of people in our country. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. And thank God there is, because there needs to be a bigger movement of it to get this dreadful, ghastly, useless government out of the way. Isabel, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Isabel Oakeshott there, talks international editor.